Good afternoon and welcome to the regular Friday meeting of the Portland City Club. We're glad you're here. We begin as usual with introductions of new members of City Club. We're always glad to see them. First, I'd like to introduce Kimberly McAleer, Government Affairs Manager for Payless Drugstores. Would you stand, please, if you're here? And Noam Rogers-Stamfer, Finance Manager, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. Thank you both for joining City Club and welcome to the club. Thanks too to our valued City Club members who recruited these new members, Robert Rogers and Karen Sheridan. Next Friday, September 20th, our speaker will be Dr. Steve Wasserstrom, Assistant Professor of Judaic Studies and Humanities at Reed College. He'll speak on misrepresenting Muslims, observations on the Gulf War. Dr. Wasserstrom will look at the images used by government officials and by the media to portray Muslims and Islam during the Gulf War and the implication that this represented, are you ready for this, an episodian American political demonology. Well, we are the great Satan after all. That will be next Friday, September 20th in the Mayfair room of the Benson Hotel. For our radio audience, I'd like to, and for those of you who are wondering why we're in the Crystal Room today, there was a conflict and so we were put into this room, but it's appropriate with our 75th anniversary coming up. Maybe some of you don't realize that for the first 35 years or so of its existence, City Club met in this very room, the Crystal Room of the Benson. So we're going back to the past today. On September 22nd, that's a Sunday, at 12:30 p.m. at the Oregon Convention Center, an important event, Governor Barbara Roberts will hold her Portland kickoff of Conversation with Oregonians. City Club members have an opportunity to attend and be involved in this process, which will allow citizens to have a voice in developing plans to overhaul Oregon's tax system. City Club members interested in volunteering to serve in this important activity are urged to attend. You can also go just to sit there and listen or to let your thoughts be known to the governor. That again is Sunday, September 22nd, 12:30 p.m. at the Oregon Convention Center. Please note in this week's bulletin the description of the 4 really spectacular events that we have planned for our 75th anniversary celebration. That begins September 27th with our Luncheon from the Past. Mark your calendars today. Please attend all 4 of those functions. I think we're going to have a wonderful time just kicking back and celebrating what City Club has done for Portland and what we have yet to do for Portland in the coming years. Discourses in Public Affairs, Issues and Answers is the City Club Merrillhurst College course based on City Club Friday programs, and it will begin again on Friday, September 20th. This is a 10-week course offered for graduate and undergraduate credit through Merrillhurst College. Club members interested in registering should call the Merrillhurst Student Services Office. Joining the Merrillhurst students next week and throughout the semester are an interesting group of people. I think you're going to be thrilled. They are 20 ninth grade students from 6 public and private schools in the Portland area. The City Club has joined forces with Youth Today Incorporated to offer this special youth program. 10 students will alternate their attendance each week. They'll be here at City Club luncheons and will join Merrillhurst students for seminar discussions with Friday program speakers following the programs. These young people I have met, they are dynamite. When they're at Friday lunches, please go over and say hi. I've told them that they're supposed to ask you tough questions, so be ready. These are some very interesting young people and they're going to be attending our luncheons this fall. City Club's Pathway to Leadership course will be offered for the 4th time beginning on October 17th. For 1 full day and 4 half days, members of that course will attend, and it's based on Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Once again, it will be taught by Linda Langley, who's been trained by the Covey Institute. Those interested in registering, please contact Nancy Hedin, our Executive Director. That course has filled up pretty fast, so the Pathway to Leadership course begins October 17th, if you're interested. Our board host today, seated at the head table, is Ross Simmons, member of the Board of Governors, consultant with SRH Associates, and as usual, it'll be Ross's pleasure as the board host to ask the first question of our speaker today. After that, we'll open up the microphone on the floor for questions. The second question will be asked by Ruth Robinson, who's a member of our Energy and Environment Standing Committee. After that, of course, we then open it up to City Club members, and I think we are going to have some good questions today. Because on some Fridays, City Club speakers principally inform us, and on some other Fridays, maybe they're principally entertaining. Once in a while, though, we have a speaker who jumps up and grabs us by the lapels and shakes us a bit. And I think today's speaker fits largely into that latter category. Dr. William Boyer, a philosopher and educator and native Oregonian, is the principal author of an initiative that he and others hope to place on the Oregon ballot next year. It's been dubbed the Oregon Plan for Environmental Rights. It's an amendment to the Oregon Constitution that makes some pretty fundamental declarations and provides some, well, interesting enforcement ideas. All persons will have the right to a healthful environment. Future generations have the right to sustainable use of natural resources. Those are some of the basics of the proposal. Now, how will those concepts be fleshed out and enforced? By a 5-person elected commission, which will supplant 5 abolished agencies. No more Environmental Quality Commission. No more Energy Facility Siting Council, Water Resources Commission, Department of Forestry, or Fish and Wildlife Commission. Did I tell you that Dr. Boyer is here today to shake us up a bit? William Boyer served in the U.S. Air Force in World War II, assisted with democratization in post-war Germany, and received graduate degrees in teaching and educational philosophy from the University of Colorado and Arizona State University. He then spent 20 years as a professor at the University of Hawaii. He and his wife now reside in Sisters, Oregon, where I understand they raise llamas. But Dr. Boyer gets around too. He's going to be in Barcelona, I understand, in another week or two to give an address. So get ready with your probing questions, and please join me in welcoming today's City Club speaker, Dr. William Boyer.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today. In fact, being here at the Benson Hotel gives me a particularly strong sense of how Oregon has changed and how I have changed since I used to deliver food from the family food store to the back door of the hotel. At that time, completing my homework at Jefferson High and getting $1 saved to buy 6 gallons of gas for my Model A Ford were my long-range goals. Now I'm concerned about the future of Oregon, the nation, and even this magnificent planet. And I like to think that the Model A Ford has long since been recycled into the steel that holds up one of the bridges. Since I'm here today to explain the Oregon Plan for Environmental Rights, I would like, at the outset, to reject the too common belief in inevitable conflict between environmental goals and development. This no-win approach is useful to some senators and columnists, but it prevents solutions and polarizes groups. Do we need development? Well, this is like asking, do we need an economic system? Should development be permitted to destroy the life support system? Of course not. So we clearly must have sustainable development, which requires a sustainable environment. A quality environment is tied to survival and also to quality of life, which is also what appropriate development should be about. Now, much of the world is now taking its first step into basic democracy. Yet our own democracy needs to progress, I think, to a higher stage. It is not able to cope with many of the emerging problems. Democracy based only on the election of people will not be sufficient to solve our problems. Instead, we need to start electing goals, values, and priorities so that the people we elect will know what they should be doing when they win an election. Otherwise, their main objective, once they are elected, may be to be re-elected. The grass-burning problem in the Willamette Valley illustrates the need to change. For decades, people have been periodically enveloped in smoke, threatening their health, and sometimes visibility has been so low it has caused tragic death on the highways. Under conventional democracy, the issue is defined as a conflict between two groups. Let's call them breathers and polluters. The breathers are larger in number, but the polluters have more money. And since pollution is profitable, the polluters can lobby very effectively. Now, the main point here is that for problems of this type to be treated under conventional democracy, the solution is treated as a political compromise solution, not an ethical or human rights solution. If each will give a little, something like the recent bill may emerge after a few decades in which pollution will be reduced slowly through the 1990s but continue at a reduced level into the 21st century. And when it occurs, it will be under the control of the DEQ to try to send it to Central Oregon rather than to let it stay in the valley. If any of you should live over there, you know the meaning of that statement. A different approach is to presume that breathers have a prior right to a healthful environment, and polluters do not have a right to pollute. And that if the right is written into law, the outcome could be quite different. Polluters will then have to pay for the cost of pollution control as part of their cost of production, rather than dumping on the public and having their pollution involuntarily subsidized. Our forest issue is useful to illustrate a similar limitation on conventional democracy relating to resources. The issue in our forests is treated as a conflict between two groups, environmentalists versus loggers. Governors, senators, and representatives either align with one group or the other, or else try for settlement based on dividing the pie, forfeit some old growth, and reach a settlement until a political media crisis arises in the future, and then do it again. Here, there are no basic rights at stake, only ad hoc Band-Aid legislation which is designed to keep constituencies minimally happy into the next election. What is omitted are the rights of future generations to the continued and sustained use of natural resources, particularly non-renewable resources. But without such rights, we move from crisis to crisis, and in the process, deplete finite resources. Topsoil, ecosystems, species of plants and animals disappear. Now, both of these ways in which environment is treated under traditional democracy are illustrations of the need for upgrading our democracy so that basic ethical values, principles, and priorities are given fundamental status in law comparable to our federal Bill of Rights. Policies established through conventional interest group politics are likely to produce no more than short-range, stopgap, mitigative law. The focus is essentially on symptoms, seldom on causes, and long-range planning becomes difficult, if not impossible. Businesses operate in a climate of unpredictability under these conditions. The quality of life deteriorates, and cynicism and pessimism affects mental health and the public political outlook. So what can be done? Clearly, more basic legal rights and priorities must be established which avoid the short-range pitfalls, the zigging and zagging of planning or lack of planning following one election after another. Democratic processes can be used to elect rights and basic values and give direction to the political process. What a remarkable world it would be if, after an election, the winning candidates knew what to do. Instead of working on image, PR, and the next election, they would create legislation required by the priorities elected by the public. If this makes sense, you can see what the Oregon Plan is trying to achieve with a constitutional initiative. We've tried to find a way people can create law that provides the following. One is a right to a healthful environment. Two, an obligation for present generations to use natural resources, providing they pass on to future generations the basic natural systems that provide the foundation for our quality of life and a sustainable economy. And three, an elected commission which has direct power over government's obligation to implement environmental law. The Oregon Plan for Environmental Rights emerged after I had written some articles in the Oregonian on how there could be more direct public election of the future, a theme I had used in my book, America's Future. I was invited to give various talks, and I found people were anxious to have a better future, but were very frustrated by the obstacles to planning at all levels. Some wondered if democracy could really work. Some were beginning to be cynical about all politics and all government. And the consistent feeling was that there was rapid change, it was out of control, that what is done is usually after the fact, and often in trying to solve one problem in isolation of others, three are created. In the name of progress, the more the better approach was threatening the quality of life, and quantity was winning over quality. The proposal I offered was to shift to the election of basic environmental rights and to have long-range planning based on ethical principles that transcend special interest politics. This proposal was used by a group of determined citizens here in Portland, and a long and arduous process began to find a practical way of translating the general objectives into public policy. Using the opportunity of the state initiative and the traditions of environmental leadership many Oregonians are proud of, we finally honed a document which we believe can give Oregon another chance at national environmental leadership. So now I want to get into these provisions somewhat more in detail. The Food and Drug Administration presumes chemicals should be guilty until they are proven innocent. Therefore, they are subjected to tests to provide a high assurance that they are safe. Then we voluntarily purchase them at the pharmacy. But in other areas of our life, we must prove the chemicals are guilty, and we are often exposed to them involuntarily. Now, for example, defoliants used in forestry areas can drift into homes and into streams. If we must prove that these chemicals are dangerous to use, we are likely to have continued spraying. If the chemical producers must do as the FDA does and prove that the chemicals are reasonably safe, few may be used. So we have a crucial principle operating here. Since the burden of proof may determine the outcome, our Oregon Plan initiative shifts the burden of proof onto the polluter to show that chemicals which may threaten health are, however, reasonably safe. The right to a healthful environment becomes part of the state constitution, and there will be no right to pollute. We need to realize that the incentive to pollute is very often very profitable to the polluter, but is always more costly to the country, the larger society, to pollute than to control pollution. Now I want to illustrate a different provision of the Oregon Plan. We all see the brown and muddy rivers after the rains, in the coast or in the valley, wherever we might be. But we seldom connect them to the rights of future generations or to any form of theft. The rivers are brown mainly because they have topsoil in them. Topsoil is finite and for all practical purposes irreplaceable. Much comes from forests that have been mistreated. Its loss will reduce forests, future forests, and in some cases move the land toward desertification. And here in Oregon, it will pollute rivers and destroy spawning beds for salmon and steelhead. Logging does not have to be stopped in order to avoid topsoil loss. Conducted properly and in the right places, it can retain topsoil, but there is now an economic incentive to use the wrong logging methods in the wrong places. Unless topsoil is part of the heritage of future generations to be used but not to be destroyed or depleted, current practices are likely to continue. The Oregon Plan provides for a right of future generations to the sustained use of the resources of natural systems, not to their destruction, not to a fly now, pay later policy. It constitutes an obligation enforceable by law for the rest of us to be stewards of nature rather than depleters. Political scientists call the current process of living off of the principle of nature rather than the interest provided by nature as generational exploitation. In effect, stealing from the common heritage of our planetary life support system that rightfully belongs to all future generations. You can see we are trying to contribute to a new era of human rights, environmental rights to a healthful environment and rights of future generations. Our proposal extends some of the environmental rights already incorporated in some of the state constitutions. In fact, I aided in getting some of these concepts into the Hawaii Constitution in 1978. And the Montana Constitution has some similar language, some similar provisions. We are, however, providing explicit rights to future generations, which goes a bit farther than some of the other states. But another important provision can increase the power of the public to make sure that these rights are not ignored. We propose that those commissions that oversee policy for the variety of state agencies which control our environment, not all agencies, but those agencies, be consolidated into one elected commission. That commission will be mandated to make sure that the environmental rights created in the Constitution are implemented through state agencies. And members of the commission will be directly accountable to the public at election time, the same as the state superintendent of schools and the attorney general. This will increase the power of the public over government. In some ways, I think, reduce the cost of government, integrate and coordinate the missions of diverse agencies, and give us debate on environmental issues during elections which currently largely do not exist. And since the constitutional provision provides strict oversight on financial disclosure, it will be much more difficult for the foxes to get into the chicken house. You may ask why we should not continue to let the governor have direct power to appoint environmentally related commissions. I believe the public is out ahead of most state and federal governments and their agencies, and that they want also more direct power over government. Clearly, some governors make much better appointments, though all are likely to be affected by the economic power of constituencies. But in order to have long-range planning, the central goals and implementation power of public policy must be more explicit and stable, not tied to the next election. Environment cannot be a political football if we are to survive. It is not a game. It is ultimate reality, the biological and ecological basis for life. Now, currently, let's look at the Columbia River. The Columbia River salmon, I think, should be thought of as the canary in the coal mine. A recent conference indicated that only 4 humpback salmon made it to Idaho last year. Now, building an economy on a safe, healthful, sustainable basis is the foundation for all the great possibilities that can be realized in the 21st century. But conventional politics has given us a disaster waiting to happen from radioactive waste at Hanford. We permitted Trojan to be sited at the optimum location for maximum disaster to the city of Portland resulting from an accident or earthquake. Procedures have been established for rich cities to export their pollution to poor country towns. Stable forests have been turned into farm crops, and many ancient forests look like bombed beachheads. And we even permitted such practices in the watershed supplying Portland's water source. Along with the conversion of most public old-growth forests into lumber, and the disappearance of plant and animal species, and the spraying of carcinogenic chemicals on farm workers, we need to ask whether political business as usual is satisfactory. To many, the proposed Oregon Plan initiative may appear too moderate to confront all the issues, but it is a different approach that takes democracy at least a first step into an age where ecology, human rights, and long-range planning are essential. The Oregon Plan concept is broader than the specific initiative we are introducing, which is only one example of the steps we can take to make government more effective and accountable in the future. Now, much of my life has been in universities where departments often fragment knowledge in the same way state agencies fragment environmental problem solving. One agency often contradicts the other. We cannot have transportation planning independent of energy planning, or fish and wildlife planning independent of forest planning. And so we can either merge all these agencies, which is the most drastic alternative, or can have one commission responsible to the public to establish policy for the environmental agencies and oversee their activities. And this is what we propose. It is the least drastic alternative, but one that can coordinate agency action for more cooperative and efficient government. I find in speaking at international conferences, and I will be at one next week in Spain, that the Oregon Plan approach to democracy is especially interesting to countries designing new forms of government. The threats to our global life support system have brought together a new world community that is transcending local political units and beginning to speak for the human race now and in the future. I believe I should read the first two recommendations that emerged in the landmark book, Our Common Future, coming from the UN World Commission on Environment and Development, with representation from all countries. Number one, this is the language, and notice, all human beings have the fundamental right to an environment adequate for their health and well-being. The second, in their principles, states shall conserve and use the environment and natural resources for the benefit of present and future generations. Now, we did not know of or work with these statements in designing the Oregon Plan. Yet, even the language is almost identical. This is not mere coincidence, for these ethical, practical survival principles are emerging through an ecological worldwide consciousness and may become guiding principles for the 21st century. Lastly, I wish to quote from the conclusions of a major law review article. Quote, "No government can respond adequately with an obsolete constitution. And even a recent constitution cannot deal effectively with a major long-range problem such as the environment. The environment is too important to human existence for it to be given any less than the highest legal status possible, that of constitutional recognition. Let the states continue to blaze this trail if the federal government will not." Thank you very much. I'd like to respond to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Boyer. I hope in the process of answering some questions you'll talk about what the plans are for the Oregon initiative that you're hoping to put on the ballot. But first, our initial question from our board host, Ross Simmons.
Thank you, Dr. Boyer, for some interesting and provocative thoughts. You have talked about expanding our democratic process to allow the election of some environmental rights, and you've compared those to the Federal Bill of Rights. When we think of the Bill of Rights, we think of terms like inalienable rights, self-evident rights. By creating the electoral process of rights that you've talked about, isn't there a risk of politicizing those fundamental environmental rights and maybe creating a case where those rights can be elected or unelected according to the whims of the populace in any given election year?
Now, I presume the question has to do with whether this opens up the area of constitutional rights to adding poorly thought out considerations, different rights, so that rights pretty soon become kind of a constitutional football. Is that, yeah, I think, I believe that I should first mention, which is connected with this, that in Hawaii, the Constitution provides provisions for people to decide on whether they want to throw the Constitution away every 10 years. It was put into effect in '58. They decided to get rid of it in '68 and have a constitutional convention. In '78, they did the same thing. This sounds very drastic and instability producing, maybe. Now they've decided to hang on to it here for another 10 years. They didn't do it recently. So I was wondering, too, whether the use of the Constitution as a way of reconsidering values and even using it to some degree to design direction for the future would have the danger that you thought. Just using the Hawaii case as an example, the conventions retained most all of the essential things that were in the Constitution previously to provide continuity and stability, but did show sensitivity to some of the emerging problems. And the considerations for Hawaii's environment, which was deteriorating rapidly in the '70s, was included in the 1978 Constitutional Convention. And I decided that since all of our institutions are invented, that maybe we have treated the Constitution in a way which is somewhat too limited. After all, there was a time in the past when even the United States was not even considering the Bill of Rights in the early days, and then the Bill of Rights was put in, and the Bill of Rights then protected us from to some degree from the concern about the tyranny of government, so it provided individual freedom. Now suddenly we've moved into an age that is an ecological age, an age of chemicals and industrialism, and at this point we can have the tyranny of chemicals, and we can have the tyranny of stealing from future generations. Now, if you want long-range planning that deals with such problems, you are in danger of getting it through statutory law, because those can be changed from election to election. So I think there is a certain amount of the risk that you talk about in which if you're going to have the public involved in the not at all easy process of getting an initiative going and changing the Constitution, then there could be changes that emerge which possibly are not all that desirable. But you know, I think we finally have to lean on the democratic processes and on the intelligence and educational level of the public, because that is what underlies the direction of where we go by local government or by state government. And I don't think there are any really good ways to give direction to states, maybe even nations, and possibly in the future even the world, unless we have what might be called meta-law, which deals with survival and deals with some basic human rights. And the Constitution consists of the instrument for the creation of meta-law. Therefore, it seems to me highly appropriate that we consider, and it's already occurred in some states, the inclusion of principles that are basically ethical in nature and do not represent merely the interest of minority constituencies.
Ruth Robinson, Energy and Environment Standing Committee. I'm going to be the one that asked the question that was referred to earlier. I wonder if you could please tell us a little bit about how this is organized, what state it has reached insofar as has there been a ballot title drafted? Is there a machinery in place to gather signatures? When do you plan to put it on the ballot, and so forth?
Yes, sure, certainly. Those of you who are interested in the actual document, we have some copies of that before you leave, and there's some of the material in the things that were passed out on the table. This is our procedure here. Within probably 2 weeks, the initiative will be filed. It's currently being drafted. The drafting will put it into the proper legal form. We have people in different parts of the state who have been working with us, and probably our main headquarters, so to speak, will be here in Portland. This is very much of a grassroots movement, and if it succeeds, it will require participation by a good deal more people than the ones we have who have been working with it up to this point. Since I have not been involved in Oregon here in a constitutional initiative, I can only just tell you what everyone knows about a constitutional initiative, and that is that something like 83,000 signatures will be required to get it on the ballot, which means about 100,000, because some of them, may not meet the legal requirement. So we have organization going, we are trying to get the word out, and from here on the question is how many people are interested in relation to finances, in relation to working with this. Ultimately, the success depends, therefore, on whether the time is ripe, whether there's sufficient interest, are the problems serious enough. If so, then we have a very active year ahead, and there'll be debates, there will be discussions, there will be accurate reporting, and there will be some magnificent forms of obfuscation that will occur. That's the way the process goes. So the main thing I can say just is that we're quite ready for the actual filing process, and then we're ready for the home stretch, although it's going to be an interesting, exciting home stretch. And being here today and having a chance to talk to people of Oregon is really a way of saying, do you understand what we're doing? Are you interested? And if you are, realize that there's an opportunity here, but it's a democratically based opportunity that's going to require a lot of participation.
I'm Roger Bachman, member. I'm speaking also as a member of the State Water Resources Commission. And while I don't want to be a wet blanket, because I agree with the principles and purposes you have espoused, I wish you would discuss in detail why you think that an elected overall commission could deal adequately with the very complex policy issues that the separate commissions now deal with, and which are coordinated through the Strategic Water Management Group at the governor's office. Because I cut down my business time and spent about 35 to 40% of my working time just on water policy, and I'm still running to catch up. And if I had to worry about environmental quality and all those other things, I don't think I could do the job.
No, I think that's a very appropriate question, and one we have considered, and this is my answer to it. And that is that clearly there's enough specialized consideration that must go into some of the different agencies so that even a full-time 5-person commission can't really stay on top of all of that. Therefore, that agency has the power, and it almost inevitably follows, will use that power to recognize that the only way of dealing adequately with the problem is to decide at what places in advisory agencies, advisory commissions need to be created. It's quite conceivable under this that you would still be there, that you would be doing somewhat the same thing, but you would be reporting to the Committee on Environmental Protection, KEEP. In that sense, the specialized attention would occur, but something rather different would occur, and that is that the direct elected power of KEEP and the mandatory obligation to be following these new environmental goals of the Constitution would make sure that in addition to the normal activities of the particular agency that you're dealing with, these environmental goals are receiving adequate attention. So that would be the way in which the specialized considerations would occur. I think there would probably have to be various advisory commissions.
Dr. Boyer, I'm Marcia Slappy, member of the City Club. Let's assume this gets on the ballot. What kind of opposition as far as money is concerned? Where will money come from to fight this, like they did in California?
Well, if you have a crystal ball and can tell us, that would be helpful, I suppose.
I left it home.
You know, one cannot anticipate that sort of thing. That's the case in...
Do you worry about any of them?
Don't worry at all. I'm concerned.
All right. Are you concerned about any of them?
Well, sure. That's, you know, anytime you move into an area of election, particularly on something that's rather important and produces change, then either for legitimate or for misunderstood reasons, there's going to be opposition. For instance, what we're doing, I think, hopefully would make those who profit by pollution pretty unhappy. And they might want to put a lot of money in, and we see what happens as a result of putting money in the way images can be played with and such. So we're up against the possibility of some rather formidable media opposition. But what good does it do to dream ahead of time of what form that might take? I think the only sensible way to proceed is to do it step by step, honestly, above board, and hopefully then getting funding from a broad citizen base, and do the best we can. Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you will.
Thank you.
David McLean, I'm a City Club member. And my question is on effectiveness. How would this new panel of environmental commissars be more effective than the current agencies or bureaucracies in dealing with complex ecological problems that are interregional in their scope and largely controlled by federal land management decisions such as spotted owl, salmon, regional disposal of radioactive waste, or even municipal solid waste with Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission on infinitum?
Well, that's an excellent point. You're mainly getting at the fact that a lot of the jurisdiction for the control of Oregon's environment is federal, right? And that's, the question then is, to what extent will this deal with that sort of problem? Clearly, in many areas, it currently wouldn't. The federal jurisdiction would supersede. Now, in the Clean Air Act, there's movement toward the principle that if a state has stronger environmental requirements than the federal, that those requirements can supersede. It may be in the future that would be true also in relation to resources. Keep in mind now that what we're talking about is not something that you should be evaluating in relation to what it's going to do in the next 2 or 3 years. Hopefully, have some effect. We're talking about something when you're in the Constitution that has to be thought of as whether it's going to be appropriate for 25, 50, 100 years. I think it may well be possible, and it would be very valuable, if the principle of state power in relation to pollution also then applied to sustainable resources, even in the federal area. The states have already been given more of a role. They're more consulted than they were previously in relation to resource use. But I would have to say at the present time that to have a state constitution that has exciting new environmental rights in it will not protect the entire environment of Oregon because a lot of it is still under federal control. It, however, would certainly send a strong message, if nothing else, to the people that we send to Congress, senators and representatives, that the Oregon public wants certain kinds of achievements with respect to the law, wants certain kinds of future, wants certain kinds of rights. In that sense, that message could be important, and if it were translated also into electing the kinds of people that come from Oregon to support rights that are similar to those that are listed in the Constitution, then those are ways of spilling over and having more impact on the federal system. But we know that if you just go back to the separation of jurisdictional powers, that the state cannot ordinarily, at the present time at least, supersede.
Ray Polani, a City Club member. Dr. Boyer, I really commend you. I think you're undertaking an action and an effort that should be undertaken. I don't think there's any question about that. However, given the status of information, misinformation and disinformation that prevails in today's world, Oregon being part of it, how do you plan to bring your message to each and every Oregonian in order to pass the initiative first and get the initiative first and then pass it at the ballot box?
Each and every. Well, we certainly want to go as far as we can through various methods. We still think the American press has some importance in relation to communication. We would hope that columnists would get a hold of this, that the press would provide some debate, some discussion. We would expect to be appearing on television, on radio. I would certainly be doing that, and there'll be others in our organization who will be doing that. So we'll be available on radio and television, and I think the media will know that if this is something that Oregonians think is important, that they're going to run it. And in that sense, then we don't have to pay a lot of money. Now, on some things, we're going to have to pay money, and so that depends, again, on the interest of those who may not want to go out and get signatures, but want to, of course, submit the funds that permits us to at the right place, get our word out, which often is likely to be fairly close to election time. In the meantime, what we have is the need for a statewide education campaign which will be aided in the organization that we've already begun to develop of groups throughout different parts of the state. They then will have to work with media, have to work with the opportunities for having lectures and discussions. And I think I should add at this point that it's crucial that the kind of education that people have in schools is linked to the growing capacity of young people to become effective participating citizens. So this as a debate topic, and also the question of whether our assumptions about some of the problems that exist in Oregon are real and what the alternatives are, what the planning goals are at the present time, should be, I think, basic to the educational system. Therefore, when students in the kinds of classes that we need, who are helping them become effective participating citizens, are able to look over some of the problems, and in most cases in their communities they don't know where the sewer goes or where the water comes from. That's another form of alienation from reality. Once they find out and say there are problems there, then the next step is not just to frustrate people with problems, it's to say what are the solutions. And obviously some of the solutions are temporary, short range, and Band-Aid is not always a bad term for some of them. But others are long range and require transition planning. And if they think about the problems of automobiles, think about petroleum, think about running out, thinking about air pollution and so forth, then some of them should be thinking in long-range terms, maybe further ahead than people even in some of the agencies, about the kind of transportation system that becomes necessary to move toward a renewable energy base. I would think by the 12th grade you'd have students thinking that way, because they have to be thinking ahead in terms of what all this means to a high-quality, sustainable future in order to be a participating citizen. We can't let planners or agencies run away with the future of Oregon. We have to be able to stand in front of that future with sufficient knowledge so that participation is not just a matter of lining up and asking a few questions, but it's a way of often pushing the agency and the government farther than it might be willing to go because of the cautionary safety concerns for people who are in political positions. If they know that the public is out in front, then we can get some very significant change. The public is not likely to be out in front unless there are civic clubs of this sort, many others that are operating, newspapers that are making use out of a concern for these ideas, and the schools themselves at all levels directing students into the kind of education that will permit them to understand and participate in designing and creating our future.
Thomas Lee, member of City Club. What's going to keep this initiative from turning into another bonanza for lawyers?
Bonanza for lawyers. Oh. Well, that's really not very likely because we are not leaning primarily on courts. We're leaning primarily, not exclusively, but primarily on the way of having a somewhat different approach to administrative law in relation to the agencies themselves. So the main power that comes through this is the power to elect those people who have to show that they're interested in being a member of the Commission on Environmental Protection, that they are willing to disclose, in fact, we have provisions on disclosure which have to do with their revealing rather constantly where their funds are coming from. Now, in that sense, we have structured things so that the courts are the secondary vehicle probably for effective change resulting from this particular provision. Even though, of course, to have new constitutional goals can be used then in various ways in the courts, and often, however, they can't be transferred with all that ease because constitutional provisions, especially rights, are sufficiently general, so there may have to be various cases that occur in the courts until somewhat more precision is made. Or in addition, administrative rulings made by the Commission on Environmental Policy to work out the meaning of various terms. But I don't see this, if you're a lawyer looking for opportunity, as one that is necessarily going to provide all that opportunity because it's not quite tilted in that direction.
I'm sorry to those of you who are still waiting to ask questions. We've seen City Club at its best today. We've run out of time, but we had an articulate spokesman, controversial views, and a lively question and answer period. Dr. Boyer, thank you very much for being with us today.